Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. As we continue to deliberate about the various daily developments both here in Israel and throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how this war began. 224 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas terror organization alongside its affiliated groups launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, and children. 132 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oen. Mr. Oen, it's good to see you, sir. What can you tell us about the latest developments since hostilities continue to intensify both on the northern front in particular, as well as in the Gaza Strip, where the operation for the eradication of the Islamist Hamas, particularly in Rafah, is seemingly intensifying?
So we'll turn to the northern front in a moment. But first, if you've been following the Donald Trump trial in New York, you must have heard the phrase catch and kill. It refers to stories in the media which were not intended for publication. But in Gaza, catch and kill refers to what the IDF hopefully will do to the Hamas leadership, that is catch or kill. Obviously, if they surrender, if they give up, show a white flag, they will be taken prisoner, undergo interrogation, and perhaps stand trial with justice meted out to them. But this is one of the goals of the war. You mentioned the eradication of the Hamas mechanism at large as the other one, and getting the hostages back alive, preferably, but if not dead. And the IDF spares no effort in trying to find and release, rescue hostages who are still alive, or at least find their bodies, exhume them if they are buried, and bring them back to Israel. Right now, there are three divisional efforts going on in Gaza. And the way the Israeli army is operating now is not through permanent divisions with permanent brigades. Rather, these are mission-tailored divisions with changing brigade combat groups, and the brigades themselves are not permanent. They have headquarters, they have their organic battalions, for instance, armor, but also infantry, engineer, and other battalions. One such division has already ended its operation in the Zaytun neighborhood in north central Gaza. The two other divisional headquarters with several brigades each are operating in Jabalia in the north, and as you mentioned, in Rafah in the south. Along the Lebanese border, a heavy barrage of drones and rockets, some 75 to 80 launched by Hezbollah, but also strikes by the Israeli Air Force hitting hard at Hezbollah targets.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Let's now turn to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you, particularly on the Gaza Strip, where are things heading to? There was a phone conversation between Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Galant and his American counterpart, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin III, during the course of which the Israeli top defense official emphasized Israel's determination to persist in eradicating Hamas from the Gaza Strip. What can you tell us about the various discussions behind the scenes about the determination? How is that translated into action?
That's a very good question, Jonathan. From the military point of view, really there's no question for the need to go into Rafah. I'll give you one example. Between Rafah and the side on the Egyptian side, there are tens of tunnels. This is basically probably the last way for the Hamas to be rearmed. We know that through those tunnels, there is a lot of things that are being smuggled from this border, from the Sinai desert. And of course, the Hamas is, from their point of view, the last thing that they would like is really that Israel would cut their last way of being armed, smuggle people, personnel, ammunition, and whatever. So from the Israeli point of view, there is no question that at least this area, which is called Philadelphia area, this is an area that should be completely closed by the IDF. And of course, the classic mission that we are talking about it from day one, basically, but of course, in the last months, that most of the battalions are not operational anymore. There are 4 of them which are left on the Rafah area. We know that the hostages are there. We know that the leaders of the Hamas are there in this area of Rafah. So, and this is basically the last, I would say, area that they are still in control. So from a military point of view, for sure, this is something that needs to be done. Of course, there are a lot of complexities, which is something that the IDF needs to take into consideration. But in general, this is what we strongly believe that needs to be done in the south part of the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, General Gavish. We'll shortly return to you about the Northern Front. I'd like to first turn to the retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you from an American perspective. Yesterday, I was closely listening to Arab leaders and the UN Secretary General speaking at the Arab League Summit in the capital of Bahrain, Manama, during the course of which both the Egyptian leader Abdel Fattah al-Sisi mentioned pretty much Israel evading any attempt to reach a truce with Hamas, even though Hamas was the one which changed the terms and conditions before reverting with a so-called agreed deal. But nonetheless, it seems like the Arab world is coming to terms with Israel's intentions to eradicate Hamas in Rafah. And therefore, is this also influencing the way things are being perceived in Washington?
I don't think the Arab League summit in Manama is making any difference at all. What has happened is that Gaza has sort of become a footnote inside of the sort of daily tick-tock of news inside of Washington, D.C. right now. As Amir mentioned, the Trump trial seems to be at the top. Further arguments about commencement speeches and sort of the collateral of what's happening in Rafah and inside of Gaza is activating the students. But candidly, about the only news that's coming through right now is the fact that the pier has been set up and the pier has started to be operational. The one other issue which seems to be inside the Beltway fighting, of course, is this whole issue where the Republicans have seized on Biden's attempt to hold back the small diameter bombs in the JDAMs. And so as a result, they've pressured Biden to come up with another $1 billion in aid for Israel, which I think is good for everybody. But in terms of where the State Department is and where the president is, unfortunately, I think they have fallen victim to the old saying, they have fallen between two stools. And right now, nobody really is taking what our government is doing in terms of trying to bring a settlement to the situation inside of Gaza of any consequence. McGurk and Hochstein and Blinken are out on the road again. They stopped off at Kiev so Blinken could play Rocking in the Free World on his guitar in a night bar. So I guess the general view of the American public is that The situation is not serious. The administration is not serious in a substantial point of view, in a sense of substantive. And I think people are far more interested in the Trump trial than what's happening inside of Israel and Gaza right now.
It's such a crucial time in history.
Yep.
It's so sad to see this playing out in the Rome of the 21st century. And the implications are going to be quite severe for the years to come. Hopefully, some may be able to salvage it in one way or another. But nonetheless, you mentioned Congress also passing a bill that, of course, has quite the significant pressure, seeking to pressure the president to keep him in check about keeping support for allies during times of war, not necessarily only about Israel, but in general terms. Let's see how that plays out in the Senate, where Schumer has probably already refused to place it on the floor, and the president already mentioned, at least his people mentioned, that he would veto it at one point in time. But we'll see how this plays out, because it's not going to be very helpful for his election campaign in any event.
Yeah.
But let's turn to General Gavish. I'd like to ask you about northern Israel versus the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. We're talking about a time when yesterday we already spoke about roughly 200 projectiles being launched from Lebanon towards Israel by Hezbollah, a number of successful strikes by the terrorist organization. And today, in response, according to Hezbollah, to the retaliatory strikes by the IDF, which included also one targeted killing of a senior leader of Hezbollah, at least a field commander of Hezbollah in the southern district of Lebanon, the situation seems to continue to intensify.
Well, the Hezbollah took a strategic decision that once we are fighting in Rafah, in the south part of Lebanon, they want to contribute their part, and they indeed a bit intensified the amount of projectiles, UAVs, and so on. And we talk about it all the time, that defense is never hermetic. And when you are shooting 50 projectiles, so if, just as an example, if you are intercepting 95% of them, so the numbers of those projectiles that are getting in is very low. But if you are shooting 200 of them, and then still you have the 95% of interceptions, the 5 number absolutely is a larger number of projectiles that are hitting the targets that they want to hit from the Hezbollah. And this is something that we see here in Israel. Of course, there is a way, if we're talking for a second just for the defense, it is not only the interception of those projectiles. This is not the only defense that you have. You have also other lines of defense. Of course, the last one is getting into the shelters for the soldiers or people that are in those areas, and some other means that we cannot discuss them here. So, but this is only on the defense, and we have to remember that fighting against rockets and missiles doesn't end only on the defensive. And you mentioned it right, that Israel is striking quite hard as a retaliation to the Hezbollah's behavior. And it means that we are not really only retaliating toward the targets or the projectiles that were sent. We are also striking infrastructure, Hezbollah's infrastructure, of course, and also some of their commanders that have been striked in the last few days. So overall, yes, the answer to your question is yes. There is. We see that the fight is being intensified. We are still under the same, let's call it, equation that the Hezbollah is saying that this is what he is doing. They are not hitting civilians from their point of view. All their efforts is to try military installations. And if there is a leaker that hit civilians, so they would say that it was not their plan. So they are still want to show us that they are not willing, basically, or wanting to go to the full-scale war. And this is the equation that is being kept, by the way, by both sides. Israel is also not striking. We don't strike any areas that civilians are in there, like Beirut or other places. And the Minister of Defense was asked a few days ago when Israel would get to this point that he would decide that he's really intensifying the war. And he said, once there would be strikes in Beirut, you would understand that this is the decision that was taken. So, and overall, there is an intensified fight. The IDF is preparing itself to any option, which is also going, full scale into the Lebanese arena. It's a matter of strategic decision that would be made by the cabinet.
Indeed. Well, just recently we spoke about EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen traveling to Lebanon, Beirut, together with the Cypriot President, meeting with Qati and other leaders, caretakers within the Lebanese elite to basically commit 1 billion euros in European taxpayers' funds to Lebanon to try and salvage it. We need to remember that the economy in Lebanon is dire. The people of Lebanon are in really big trouble at this point in time. And unfortunately, the sectarian divisions as a result are even becoming wider. We're seeing a lot of tensions in multiple sectors of Lebanon, from the north to the south, not only to do with Israel, but Lebanese mothers, or at least tiers of Lebanese mothers, will stream down because of this Iranian tumor in their midst. And we're going to see this intensify in the near future. Unfortunately, more and more people are telling me this conflict is inevitable, which is not something that anybody would like to hear. But Mr. Oen, I'd like to revert to the Arab League's statement by King Abdullah II, since this also relates to Lebanon. He says as follows: we should confront armed militant groups who commit crimes above the law, especially smuggling drugs and arms, which is what Jordan has been thwarting for years now in order to protect our youth from this external threat, obviously referring to the Assad regime. Ironically, President Bashar al-Assad, to the dismay of the Emir of Qatar, who was the only Arab leaguer who opposed the reintegration of the Assad regime into the Arab League, was present at the Arab League, and he heard those words. Nevertheless, with the blessing of Iran and support of Iranian militias in Syria, Lebanon, Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, they seem to be smuggling weapons and drugs into Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley, but also into the GCC countries, namely the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Bahrain.
You mentioned earlier, you and Mark, Secretary Blinken playing his guitar in the Ukraine. Had he come with his guitar to the Middle East, he should have chosen another tune. Still crazy after all these years. If you're looking for logic, you will not find it in this region. Now, what the Jordanian king meant to say was, yes, I am helping the Israelis secure their eastern border, which is my own western border. But I'd rather hide it under the pretext of saving my youth from drugs. Because King Abdullah knows full well that if the Iranians manage to smuggle weapons to various Hamas and other organizations, squads trying to cross into the Jordan Valley, and then to the West Bank and Israel proper, then his own regime would be endangered. And therefore, there is this coalition of American, Jordanian, Israeli, and sometimes other forces successfully thwarting the Iranian attempts and sometimes attempts by proxies, by militias to act inside Jordan or from Jordanian territory against Israel. And this brings into focus once again the significance of Jordan and Egypt being strategic partners of Israel and of the West because of the peace treaties with Israel, the Egyptian one from 1992 and the Jordanian one from 1994.
1978, you mean?
No, 1982, it went into force.
Indeed. General Kimmon, I'd like to hear your position on this. And beyond that, we heard the leader of Ansar Allah, the Houthi tribal leader, coming out and saying maritime shipping is no longer safe anywhere, with chief focus, of course, on the waterways which his tribal militiamen have already been targeting, but also beyond that now, referring to the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, on the first issue about the drugs, that's a region-wide problem, and I will tell you the amount of work that we're doing in Iraq to try to intercept and interdict with their border guards, the amount of Captagon that's coming across the borders is phenomenal. There is a drug problem that is blossoming in the Arab Middle East that nobody has got a grip on. There's a question about whether this is coming out of Syria, possibly coming out of Iran, certainly, but most of these precursor elements seem to be coming out of China. That's just an issue, but it's becoming a far more important border issue to some of these countries than the smuggling of guns and other contraband. Second, on the issue of the Houthis have been making some outrageous claims again about attacking the Mason and a couple of other ships. They really haven't been overly successful in terms of targeting ships and creating a significant amount of destruction. The cost, of course, to our anti-missile capabilities, the SAM-3s that are being fired, is just enormous. But I noticed today that the Houthis are talking about they're potentially going to be targeting the pier as well, because the pier into Gaza, of course, is not simply there to provide humanitarian aid. Why would the Americans do that? That's just ridiculous. There must be some conspiratorial reasons for that. So if they get serious about targeting that pier, I think that would probably be far more significant than what they're trying to do by attacking the ships. One can only imagine both the physical problems and the I/O problems, the information problems, if that pier was interdicted by the Houthis.
Jonathan, if I may, the Pentagon deputy spokesperson yesterday, when talking about the pier, about the J-lots, mentioned that there is a destroyer, probably armed with Aegis, guarding the pier. So obviously there are preparations for such a contingency, where the pier, or not only the pier, also there are other landing craft and other supply ships on the way. If they were to be targeted, the Sixth Fleet, in this case, is ready to respond.
We also have to remember that if they would shoot something from Yemen toward the pier, then they can't be accurate, and it means basically that they are trying to attack also Israel. But just to put things in proportion, we have to remember that the Houthis are trying to violate the Israeli airspace for months, and they didn't succeed even once. All the missiles that were shot toward Israel were intercepted. All the UAVs were intercepted or via the US forces or Israeli forces or other forces that are in this area. So I don't think that from a military point of view, this is something that is, we have to be afraid of it. Of course, we have to be very aware and we have to take it seriously. But from what we saw until now, they don't really have serious capabilities to actually do it.
It does raise the target whether particularly this group thinks that the pier is going to be a target, whether of missiles or whether other kind of attacks, or even the personnel that are involved in doing the unloading and transporting to the transshipment point on land. Is there value to any group by attacking that organization or those facilities?
Well, the extent of their capabilities, first and foremost, is the extent of what the Islamic Republic of Iran gives them. And ultimately, their motto is derived from the motto of the RGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guards, and that is death to America, death to Israel, curse to Jews, victory to Islam. So obviously, it is in the title. They seek to eradicate America and eradicate Israel. Of course, wishful thinking. Nonetheless, it needs to be kept into context. But we have run a course, and this update today has come to its end. So I'd like to thank General Kimmett, General Gavish, and Mr. Oen for your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.